It's time for Forward Nation Radio. Now here he is, the host of Forward Nation Radio, David Leventhal.
This is good cake. What? We're on? What? Oh man, this is good cake. Sorry. This has to be the mother of all chocolate cakes. Mother of all cakes. Maybe it's just something about bombing the shit out of somebody that just really makes the cake go down well. This is just damn fine cake. Anyway, thanks for joining us. This is Forward Nation Radio with me, David Leventhal. Don't worry about interrupting my cake. It'll still be there, I hope, when we're done, if nobody else gets their hand on it. I'm going to need it later on. I'm going to need some more cake to wash down the pain. The pain of having lost what I think of as a dear friend. Late breaking news. Bill O'Reilly is out at Fox News. I feel terrible. Where will I get my fake news every night at 8 p.m.? The only thing that keeps me going is the knowledge that he will certainly end up somewhere. Presumably, once it blows over a little bit, he'll end up back at the sexual predator Fox News, or one of its many affiliates. But Fox News today makes a big stand for, oh my God, we need advertisers in order to make a whole lot of money. Let's be clear that the sexual harassment was clearly not what turned Fox News off to Bill O'Reilly. It's the fact that people found out about the sexual harassment. It's always the lack of cover-up that does it. Enough word got out, advertisers started pulling themselves, so Bill O'Reilly is out. Stay tuned. He will land on his feet for those of us who are worried about the Papa Bear. More news this week. More late-breaking news, as a matter of fact. We talked last week and the week before, and probably the week before that, about campaign funding and how important it is to change the way we fund political campaigns in America if we're ever going to hope to move things forward for the good of the American public. Well, today the New York Times announced that Sheldon Adelson, casino magnate, gave $5 million to Donald Trump's inauguration, which I think comes down to about $1 million for each person who attended the actual inauguration on the mall in Washington, D.C. Presumably it's a little bit cheaper for those who actually attended the party where all the business is actually done. Of course, Sheldon Adelson gave $5 million, not because Donald Trump is the kind of leader who so inspires Americans to give him a lot of money, but of course because Donald Trump is the kind of leader who inspires rich people to give him a lot of money so that he can give them a whole lot more of your money. Just think for a moment about the fact that a casino magnate, a man who makes his living off of the bad decisions and addictions of others, and a very, very healthy living, is going to be having an outsized say in U.S. policy. Other news from the week, very little of it on a positive front. Neil Gorsuch was confirmed, as expected, to the United States Supreme Court. The Republicans have succeeded in stealing the fifth seat to maintain their majority, despite, as I've noted, having lost the popular vote in 6 out of the last 7 presidential elections, and despite, of course, the opening having occurred while Barack Obama was the legitimately elected, and focus on legitimately elected, President of the United States. What will it mean? We will have a show later on dedicated to the Supreme Court and what's on its calendar and what's expected. But here's a quick overview of what it's going to mean. It's going to mean bad times for women, for minorities, for consumers, for children, especially children who don't like to develop asthma from breathing dirty air. It'll mean bad things for the planet because efforts to address climate change will undoubtedly be impacted by the United States Supreme Court, who will limit the government's ability to address climate change and other pollution and other public health issues. It will be bad news for unions. That one's going to happen real quick. But he's only 5, and we still have Anthony Kennedy, who's the conservative that liberals love because he's not completely out of his mind, insane right wing as the rest of the conservatives on the United States Supreme Court. If another seat opens up, then we will be concerned about abortion, about contraceptive rights, affirmative action. The amount of progress that's been made in this country over decades, fitfully, will go right out the window. We were celebrating Earth Day at Queens College today. I realize it's a little bit early, but between today and Earth Day, 420 comes, and I think there was probably concern that after 420 Day that a lot of people would sleep through Earth Day. So we were celebrating on the quad. I happened to talk to someone who was wearing a Trump button. Interestingly, he said he didn't vote for Trump, which I really did find, I think that's like wearing an Adolf Hitler button in 1946. I understand maybe, no, I really don't understand maybe, but it's one thing to have made a terrible decision before the fact, but once the evidence is in, now you're wearing the button? But anyway, it's interesting talking to him and talking about, well, this is good that Neil Gorsuch and not Merrick Garland is on the United States Supreme Court, because we don't need another activist judge. Couldn't see that one coming. That's right off the Fox News playbook. That's from the right-wing playbook. Activist judges, or in this case, justices. I said to him, what does that mean? Well, they should be enforcing the Constitution as it's written. I mean, as it's written according to what they think it's written and what it should be, which is the way justices act. When I pointed out to him that it was interesting that liberals are always being attacked as activist judges, when in fact, studies of the United States Supreme Court show that it is the current conservative justices on the United States Supreme Court are the most activist judges we've ever seen. And by activist, what I mean is willing to take the decisions of the United States Supreme Court and substitute for the democratic process. It is conservatives on the United States Supreme Court who are quickest to overturn rulings of Congress, laws of Congress, decisions of the American public. It is conservatives on the Supreme Court who invalidated Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act a few years ago after it had been renewed by the United States Senate 98-2. The conservative non-activists on the United States Supreme Court saying, well, even though 98 senators thought that this was a good idea to renew this, we know better than that 98. So much for activist judges being on the left. They also are willing to overturn acts of the presidential administration when it comes to regulating the environment. And this is what we're going to be seeing. We're going to be seeing efforts, if there ever are efforts, not under the Trump administration, of course, but under subsequent administration, to try to address climate change, to try to limit pollution, to try to promote the health of the American public. You could bet that Neil Gorsuch will be a reliable vote. No, you cannot do that. I guess an activist judge is a judge who does something that you don't like. Latest on Russia. Not a whole lot to report on Russia. It does look like a couple of people are in serious jeopardy there. Indictments may be coming. I guess the big news on Russia is that the chairperson of the House Intelligence Committee, who was running the investigation supposedly, but running it right to the White House and back, Devin Nunes, is out as leading the inquiry, trying to at least give the veneer that an actual investigation will be taking place. Once again, we can hope that as things are quiet, it's because the Senate and the House committees are busy investigating, and not to mention our FBI and other Homeland Security agencies are busy investigating the ties. Let's hope that that's what's going on, and efforts to squelch any investigation are not mostly underway. Okay, well, we made reference earlier, in case you missed that reference, to blowing things up. And Donald Trump, well, debating world policy with the leader of China, deciding to go off on a tangent and talk about how wonderful the chocolate cake was that they were eating for dessert. Donald Trump is taking a liking to blowing things up. The real concern here is, I guess, several-fold. One is, it seems pretty apparent that the President of the United States has absolutely no idea what the hell his administration is blowing up and where it's blowing it up. Having famously, most of you have seen the video clip of him talking about blowing up, dropping a bomb in Iraq, when, of course, what he meant to say was Syria at that time. When asked a question about whether Donald Trump, whether he, the President of the United States, is ordering these attacks on other countries, his response basically was, well, I got more important things to do. We have the generals in charge of that. Sadly, for some of us, that actually makes us feel a little bit better. At least we don't necessarily know that the generals are as insane and incompetent and unqualified as Donald Trump is. Maybe some of them will be there making actual good decisions. I do have a little bit of pause for a moment when I think about the fact that the one who seems to be primarily making the decision, our defense secretary, goes by the nickname Mad Dog. It must say something about this country and where we stand that I'm actually getting some comfort out of the fact that military decisions on who to bomb are being made by a guy named Mad Dog. What the real concern, of course, here is that Donald Trump seems to believe in nothing except praise for Donald Trump. And unfortunately, after we drop some bombs, well, this is America. A president who drops bombs tends to get a lot of support. Americans don't tend to be so concerned about little trivialities like civilian casualties and whether we actually achieved our aims or anything, or advanced our aims at least. We just like the idea that we can blow crap up. And Donald Trump's feedback so far has been positive, like when he was able to read a speech into a teleprompter. Oh my God, he's acting presidential. Well, except for the fact that he apparently had nothing to do with the decision. But still, he's kind of acting a little presidential. And there is a real concern among a lot of people that when you give someone like that positive feedback, as you would any child, you are concerned that that will lead them to repeat the behavior. Maybe repeat the behavior more often than we would like to see the President of the United States repeating his behavior of dropping bombs on people. Note that over the last few years, we have undeniably killed thousands of civilians near the Middle East. This cannot be doing good for the United States' efforts to gain the hearts and minds of people in our fight against terrorism and other scourges. Finally, for the news, this Saturday is a science march. That's right, a march in favor of science being organized in Washington, D.C., and satellite marches all around the country. I hope to be at one on Long Island or in New York City, near where I live. And I hope that you're able to join a march near you. I just want to pause here for a second and note that it is 2017. It is the United States of America. And people feel the need to march to promote science. Science. Did I somehow fall asleep and wake up in the 15th century? Anyway, since science is under threat, I hope you find the time to get out and march. Okay, that's it for the news. I'd like to talk a little bit now about, well, we'd like to address some listener questions, as we usually do. First question comes from Richie in College Point, New York. Which countries do you believe are the biggest threat to the United States in terms of the economy and or military and volatility? And should our government have a tougher approach to handling these countries? Okay, well, there's a lot in that question. First of all, on economy. Who's the biggest threat to the United States in terms of the economy? Well, I mean, you're just talking basically about bragging rights for the most part. At this point, the United States has a lot of built-in advantages, among other things being that English is the language of business worldwide, the language of aircrafts and pilots, etc., worldwide. So we have a huge, and basically the dollar is almost the universal world's currency still. We have some huge built-in advantages. Our economy, other than based on threats from within by incompetent leaders, will be doing fine for the foreseeable future. Will we have rivals growing? I hate to say this, but I hope so. I think it could lead to a lot of stability. I think there is hopes that China's rise as an economic superpower will lead China to take the kind of responsibility for helping to promote a successful world that the United States has long shouldered. So I think that would be a big positive, that other countries are also succeeding economically. Whether we're succeeding the best or the second best or the third best, I don't think it's a zero-sum game, in the sense that if some countries like China and India are doing better, I think that will inure to the benefit of everybody, including the United States. The more vexing question, I suppose, from that question is military. Who is the biggest threat to the United States military power? Everybody's a threat to the United States military, in the sense that nobody can rival the size of our military. As pointed out in a prior class, we still spend more on our military each year than the next 7 countries combined, and that's even before Donald Trump's proposed to use increases in military spending. Our military is going to be there. We're going to have the capacity to destroy the world many times over for presumably the long foreseeable future. When I was growing up, I hate to start a sentence that way, but when I was growing up, the big threat in the world was the Soviet Union. And I hate to make it sound like our battle against terrorism seems quaint, but to some extent, when you have nuclear weapons, thousands of nuclear weapons pointed at each other, and two sides of an argument that are not very friendly with each other and are, in fact, pretty hostile to each other, the threat seems a whole lot more existential than even the awful threat that terrorism poses. Obviously, all bets are off if terrorists start getting a hold of nuclear weapons, which perhaps may be the biggest military threat, volatility threat to America and to the world order as we currently know it. But when I say that everybody's kind of a threat to the United States, well, we've learned how much we spend on our military. There's still a huge limit to our ability to impose our will on the rest of the world. We basically couldn't even beat the crap out of Iraq and impose our worldview upon them. The United States isn't going to be able to unilaterally handle these countries. And again, to a large extent, especially when Donald Trump is the president of the United States, I think that's probably a good thing. Should we have a tougher approach to handling these countries? We're going to have a tougher approach whenever we have world support to handle these countries. One of the reasons we were willing to enter into nuclear agreement with Iran, not just the fact that it was the best solution we could possibly find, was that much of the rest of the world community was about to leave our coalition and avoid the sanctions regime that had been imposed on Iran. And ultimately, we could not do much on our own. We're going to need the rest of the world to get involved and to help us. And that's what I think is going to have to happen. Now, how do you deal with actors that we didn't face years ago? The one difference between now and years ago, when the Soviet Union had missiles and facing at us and we had missiles facing at them, we went by the object of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, in a proper acronym there. Mutually assured destruction was premised on the idea that neither the United States nor Russia would be first to use nuclear missiles, because it basically would mean their annihilation and the annihilation of the planet. Well, that worked, I guess, for a while. The problem is that now when you're dealing with people who may be religious fanatics or certifiably insane, where they're not necessarily so concerned about the future of the planet or the future of their lives or the lives of their own people, potentially a threat posed by something like North Korea and certainly by the Islamic State, then the nature of the enemy is totally different and the old bets are off. How do we handle these countries? I'm going to sound like a liberal here, but we're going to need to work with the rest of the world community to impose sanctions and to change behavior to the extent that we can do that. All right, that was a long answer, and I hope it somewhat answered the question. The next question, why should we be worried about rising populism around the world? Also an interesting question. That's from Avi in Flushing, Queens. Why should we be worried about rising populism around the world? Well, populism is an interesting term that can have several different meanings. Populism as embodied by, let's say, Bernie Sanders and the people who supported Bernie Sanders seems like a wonderful thing. It's actually trying to run a country and run the world for the benefit of the world's citizens and the people in it. To actually promote the interests of human beings as opposed to the interests of corporations and very wealthy people. But of course, populism has taken on a very negative connotation because it has frequently been misused and has been used by brutal dictators and others to gain power by appealing to often the prejudices and uncertainties of their public in a way that seems to appeal to them while in fact not doing anything to actually promote their interests. Populism often comes with tones of racism, white supremacy, etc. It's a way that sounds populism and gives it a negative term. Should we be worried about this? Well, as the French elections loom within just a few days, the world is obviously extremely concerned about a right-wing populism that is going around the world and is promoting nativism, bigotry, exclusion, discrimination, all supposedly in the name of people, most of whom don't want any part of that. Okay, I want to go now, in the last few minutes we have, to the main subject of today's discussion, and that is healthcare. This is the healthcare show. Timing is perfect. I didn't do that cough for effect. I'm sorry. I and my family have been struggling with the cold. The fact that I'm struggling with this cold makes me look once again, thankfully, at the fact that I and my family have health insurance. When my children are sick in the middle of the night and sweating profusely and coughing and sounding awful, it is a great comfort to me to know that I can take them to the doctor. The idea that people in this country cannot go to the doctor when they are sick is something that is remarkable to me. But then again, I'm a socialist, and I hope for unreasonable things. In reality, is it really possible for any country to provide health care to all of its citizens? Is that even possible? I expect that many of you listening already know the answer to this question. When doing this in class, we spend a lot of time saying no other country does that, right? And then hands will start going up somewhat tentatively at first and be like, well, doesn't France do that? Okay, I'll give you France. What about Canada? Well, that's Canada. I mean, what do you want? Sure, Canada, but they don't really count. I mean, it's Canada. Okay, fine. Canada. If you're a Canadian citizen, you get health care. Fine. Okay, but so France and Canada, I'll give you those. And then hands go up, Switzerland and Great Britain. And the answer, of course, is every single industrialized first world nation in the world, except for the United States, manages to provide health care to all of its citizens. Just let that linger for a minute. Every industrialized nation in the world, except for the United States, manages to provide health care, health insurance to all of its citizens. How unbelievably pathetic is this? How do we let that happen? Is America the can't-do nation of the world? Are we proud of that? Everyone else can do it, but not us. We're number last, whatever number that is. We're number last. It should be a source of great shame and embarrassment, and it is for many of us, at least those of us on the left. Families USA, a few years ago, research organization, advocacy organization, estimated that one American dies every 20 minutes for lack of access to health insurance and health care. One American every 20 minutes. That came to, I think there was a different study they'd done a couple of years before, said that over 26,000 people between the ages of 25 and 64, over 26,000 people in 2010 died for lack of health insurance. In 2001, America was the victim of a terrorist attack. Almost 3,000 Americans died on a day that will forever be ingrained in many of our minds. Especially, of course, those of us who lived in New York, but not entirely. This is more than 8 times as many people are dying every year. By the way, a study by an organization affiliated with Harvard Medical School estimated a few years ago 45,000 deaths a year in America for lack of access to health care. We start invading foreign countries and dropping bombs wherever the hell we want, being the world's foremost practitioner of torture, because almost 3,000 Americans were killed on 9/11. But when far greater numbers die for lack of health care, what is our response? Well, if someone tries to fix that, I'm going to be really upset about that. The numbers, by the way, have been getting worse, except for Obamacare, and not better. Up until Obamacare, that is, the numbers were getting a whole lot worse. Read some interesting statistics from 2000 to 2006 of employers employing more than 200 workers, large employers. They went from 69% in 2000 to 61% in 2006 providing health care for their workers. 8% fewer large companies were providing health insurance in just 6 years. Companies had learned that they could get away with hiring employees without providing health insurance. Things were desperate enough for American workers that they didn't have to give that inducement to get them to work. According to Fortune magazine, publishing a study from the Henry Kaiser Foundation, share of Fortune's 500 Fortune's top companies that paid 100% of their employee health care dropped to 9% in 2016 from 34% in 2001. In 2001, 34% of the top companies provided all of their company's health care, and in 2016 it went down to 9%. Something needed to be done. Something needs to be done to address the underlying problem that Americans lack health insurance, and something needs to be done for the fact that it's getting much, much worse. But you say, we don't want to screw up America's healthcare system. We have the best healthcare system in the world. That's true to the extent that you have the best parents in the world, and your dog is the best dog in the world, and your bagel shop is the best bagel shop in the world, and your favorite TV show is the best TV show in the world. In other words, if you're a child making decisions out of hopes without actually any facts to back them up. In fact, our healthcare system is mostly pathetic compared to the rest of the world. That's right. We basically have a mostly pathetic healthcare system. A recent report by the Commonwealth Fund, 2014, ranked the United States against 10 other comparable nations, first world, European and North American primarily nations, that were most similar to the United States, and ranked their healthcare systems. Of those 11, guess where the United States landed? And I'll give you a hint. It wasn't number one unless you're looking at it upside down. If you're looking at it upside down, we're number one. It's like we're bizarro number one. We were last. Let's start with the good news. The quality of our health care was actually mediocre. I don't want to go good. We're mediocre when it comes to quality of health care if you're one of the people who actually get that health care. But there were a whole bunch of other measures on which we were, and I will be reading several, last in each of these categories. Access to health care. Well, we're obviously the only of those 11 countries that has uninsured people. We also, more than any other nation, Americans go without care because of the cost. For many people, depending on your quality of your care, you are more likely than people in most of the rest of the world to go without health care, to go without seeing a doctor because of how long it will take you to get an appointment. We're also last in equity. People with below average incomes are, and here's the term used in the study, much more likely than in other countries to report not visiting a physician when sick, not getting a recommended test or treatment, not filling a prescription, or skipping doses of required medicine because they cannot afford the costs. When one starts looking at the fundamentals of pharmaceutical pricing, and we will be discussing that on a show very soon, you realize that basically the price of pharmaceuticals and healthcare is pretty much random, pulled out of someone's ass. There was a great article several years ago that's often cited, Stephen Brill's article in the Time magazine, a long article from a few years ago, a remarkable expose on how little relationship there is between any rational basis for cost and what people end up paying. We hose the people without insurance to the extent we can, which makes the system works and makes it less equitable, even less equitable than it already is. if I have insurance, my insurance can negotiate rates. The hospital, the doctors, whatever, will just pull some incredibly huge number out of their ass and say that you need to pay us $2,000 a day for a saline drip. Knowing that with people with insurance, the insurance companies will negotiate that down. They'll have an agreement as to what will actually be covered. People without insurance will get screwed and will end up owing, perhaps for the rest of their lives, money to doctors, hospitals, insurers, that bears no relationship to the actual cost of the procedure, and in fact, money for a procedure that is costing them dramatically more than it's costing people who just have insurance to negotiate rates for them. I have a personal experience I'd like to share with you on this one. A couple of years ago, my son needed a couple of prescription medications. And I went to my local pharmacy to fill the prescriptions and was told, okay, that'll be $150, please. While I was in my mind busy rationalizing the fact that I was going to deny these medications to my 3-year-old son, I decided, well, something's wrong here. This doesn't make sense that these medications are going to cost me $150. And I inquired about it, and I said, is there a generic with my insurance? And they looked a little more closely, and they said, you don't have insurance covering this. I said, no, okay, there's a problem. Hold on. And it turns out there was a mix-up, and they didn't have a record of the insurance, and I had to go give them another record of the insurance, and my insurance had changed. I forgot what it was. But anyway, what I found most interesting about that, so I ended up, of course, they said, okay, all right, that'll be $5. So I went for about $150 to my copay of $5, $10. I forget exactly what it was. But what was interesting is when I got the receipt in the mail about where the cost, about what ended up being paid for this, the pharmacy was charging me $150. When I looked at the receipt I received from the insurance company, it turns out the insurance company paid a grand total of $37.50 combined for the medication. So if you have insurance, they're able to sell you this medicine profitably at $37.50. If you don't have insurance, they will steal from you $150 and get it out of you, whatever they have to do for the rest of your life. Garnish your salary, whatever they have to do. Efficiency. We were also last in efficiency. Healthcare efficiency. We use the emergency room more than others. Emergency room is about the least efficient way to use healthcare. We use the emergency room. Administrative costs, duplicative tests. Well, understand that in America, of course, there are a lot of for-profit actors acting within the system. And they all have an incentive to bump up the price as much as they possibly can. Raising costs, raising costs, raising costs. What's interesting is the concept of administrative costs being so high in America compared to the rest of the world, particularly those countries that use some kind of single-payer universal health care system. Our administrative costs for private health insurance have tended to average, at least before Obamacare, in the high teens, depending on which study you read and when. I've seen anywhere between 16 and 21%. That's the administrative cost of providing health care to people. In other words, right off the top, 1/5 or 1/6 of our health care spending does not go to provide health care. Where does that go? That goes to things like paying huge salaries, which we just discussed before, from insurance company executives and other people involved in the system. That's a huge segment of our administrative costs. What we also know is, since insurance companies are for-profit actors, they do not make any money if they insure sick people. And a lot of insurance money is spent by insurance companies, not on providing health care to people, but on figuring out who they can insure without having to actually provide them with health care. In other words, who's healthy, who's liable to remain healthy, and therefore, who's a big profit arm for us. Administrative costs are high specifically because insurance companies spend a lot of money making sure they don't provide insurance to those people who most need insurance. Administrative costs are also high because once somebody does get sick, does perhaps get a chronic condition, God forbid is HIV positive or some such, or has cancer, well, now they become a money loser for the insurance companies. So what have the insurance companies done for years and years? They've engaged in a process called rescission, where they figure out a way to rescind the policy of, in many cases, long-time policyholders once they get sick and actually need the insurance. So if you get sick, your insurance company will go back and figure out a way to rescind your policy because now you are going to cost them a whole lot more money. That is something that has been limited through the use of Obamacare. But it is also something, when practiced, drives up administrative costs to throw people off the rolls. There is a famous scene in the movie Sicko, which I heartily recommend for anybody interested in learning more about our healthcare system, where a woman testifies in front of Congress and breaks down crying and says, "I killed people for a living. That was my job. When people got sick, I was told to go back and look over their policies, their original documents from wherever they first signed up, and look for anything that will allow us to take that policy away." Companies were rescinding policies because people hadn't stated that they had acne. In the application form, it says if you ever suffered from a serious skin condition. People think everybody has acne. That's not a serious skin condition, so people would say no. Years later, when they got sick, the insurance company would say, "That's it. No insurance for you. You lied on the application." Our efficiency is terrible. Administrative costs are high teens, 20%. Interestingly, our most efficient healthcare delivery system in America, Medicare. That's right, government insurance. Medicare administrative costs average 3 to 4%. The head of Medicare doesn't get anywhere near what the head of insurance companies make. Medicare doesn't have to spend its time figuring out who not to insure, who might actually need health care. Administrative costs are a fraction of what they are for private insurance. In fact, every time an American eligible for Medicare switches to the private Medicare plan that is now available after the Bush administration, Medicare Advantage, it costs the government something like 12% more for every person who switches from the government Medicare to a private Medicare plan. Overall, the United States healthcare delivery system is mediocre, leaves people behind. If we were saving a whole lot of money, you might say, well, sacrifices need to be made. I wouldn't say that, but maybe you would. But all these numbers I've talked about, the fact that we are the only nation with people who don't have health insurance of industrialized nations, is all of these accomplishments are made despite the fact that we spend dramatically more than anybody else in the world on healthcare, both per capita spending, per person. And again, in light of the fact, you have to keep these numbers in mind, that we are the only country that has, at this point, still more than 30 million people without health insurance. That being said, we spend about more than 17% of our gross domestic product on health care. Nations that provide universal health care average about 10%. Numbers, we're 50% more than everybody else. We spend more, we get less. Finally, the last category we come in last, healthy lives, preventable deaths, infant mortality. That's right, America is pretty low down on the list of nations when it comes to something like infant mortality. Life expectancy, we do worse than a lot of nations. Lousy outcomes, premium prices. This is the healthcare system we're fighting to preserve. We'll talk next time about Obamacare and efforts to change the system. Thanks for joining us for our special healthcare show. We hope you enjoyed Forward Nation Radio. We hope you have been enjoying us every week. Please go to forwardnationradio.com. We are working hard to put more exciting and interesting stuff up there, and there's new stuff every day. Well, every week anyway. forwardnationradio.com. Check us out on Facebook. Please share us with your friends. Spread the word. Listen to us on Podbean. Send all the links to everybody you know. Forward Nation Radio, thank you for joining us. Have a good week.
You've been listening to Forward Nation Radio with David Leventhal.